Anaphora. What is anaphora? Anaphora is the repetition of a word or sequence of words at the beginning of clauses. Think about it this way. It is the repetition of a word or sequence of words at the beginning of each sentence or phrase. For example, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. The repetitive phrase or sequence of words is it was the. You can see it here colored blue for convenience. It's repeated at the beginning of every phrase, this sequence of words. Another example. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. In this case, this is set out as a poem, and it makes it much easier to recognize the anaphora because it is at the beginning of every line, and that repeated sequence of words is I have, and you could see it there. Now, the process for identifying anaphora has several steps. First, you look for a repetitive word or set of words. Then you have to make sure it is at the beginning of the clause, or at the beginning of a sentence, or for ease, right after a comma. Because if a word repeats, or a set of words repeats, it does not automatically mean it's anaphora. There are several other forms of repetition. Anaphora is the repetition at the beginning of the clause, which is the beginning of a sentence or right after a comma. And after you've done that, pick out each instance that word or set of words is repeated in the same exact way over and over again. And then you have identified the anaphora. What are the functions of anaphora? Why do writers and people who give speeches use this? Number one, it creates an emotional appeal. You keep hearing the same words, and especially if you're trying to move somebody to action and keep using the same words that are trying to get people to move to action, that creates emotional appeal. But it also strengthens arguments. If you are arguing about some type of conclusion, and you keep repeating the conclusion, and every time you're giving different evidence, it makes the argument much more powerful. It delivers it straight to home with the listener or the reader. So you can see that it has quite a variety of functions, from artistic to very intentional, logical argumentation. It also creates a rhythm to help in remembering. So it's also used quite a bit in poetry, because the repetitive part of it, and as you saw in the poem, helps the reader remember. It also emphasizes some points. So in the poem, if you go back here, it's talking about the experiences of the speaker. They have done this, and they have done that, and they have done this also, and that, and so on. The person is experienced, and Frost here is delivering that point to home. So another example. Let's follow the first step. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? So step one, we look for a repetitive sequence of words at the beginning of each sentence. And here, because it is a poem, it's clear. Where is the repeated sequence of words? Another example. This one's not poetry. So now we have to read it and look for the repetitive phrase and make sure it's coming at the beginning of each sentence or right after a comma. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. And this comes from a speech, Robert F. Kennedy delivering news of Martin Luther King's death. The repetitive phrase is what we need in the United States is not. And it repeats 3 times. Notice it's not all throughout the speech or the sequence of it, but 3 times. It doesn't have to be all throughout, but it has to repeat enough times. So, twice, 3 times, 1 time, of course, it's not repeated. 3 times is a good way to identify anaphora. Also, if it's repeated 2 times, mentioned 2 times, that's also anaphora. So it's used 3 times, and it's at the beginning of each sentence, each clause. So it is anaphora. Trivia. Well, the word anaphora is a Greek word, which means to carry back. Because the repeated word is brought back, is carried back to the beginning of the following clauses or sentences. The use of anaphora in literature is very ancient. It is clear in the Bible. Here's an example from the Bible. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. The repeated sequence of words here, or word, in the anaphora is I. You're probably thinking, wait a second. That's not what I identified as the repetition. I identified as a child. Well, that's right. A child is also repeated, but it is not anaphora. It is a repetition, but it's not anaphora. Why? Because it's coming at the end of the clause, and that is called epistrophe. Epistrophe is the opposite of anaphora. It's a repeated sequence of words that comes at the end of a clause or sentence, or right before a comma. If you want more information on epistrophe, you can click the link below in the description, or at the end of this video there will be a link to that as well. Now, if you use anaphora and epistrophe in the same sentences, it's called simplicy, and that's also another type of rhetorical device. So all 3 are rhetorical devices. If you are interested, there are videos on each, plus other types of repetition. Thanks for watching.